If anyone had asked Elena Carter what defined her relationship with her younger sister, she would have smiled and given the same answer she'd repeated for years. We're close, like best friends. It was the kind of response people expected, the kind that made holiday dinners less awkward and kept old family friends nodding with approval. But deep down, Elena knew better. Sisterhood, at least in her world, wasn't built on trust, it was built on endurance. Growing up, Elena had always been the responsible one, the golden child with perfect grades, a tidy room, and dreams stitched together by the hum of a sewing machine their parents bought secondhand. Sabrina, 2 years younger, was the whirlwind, beautiful, charming, and effortlessly magnetic. Where Elena worked for every ounce of praise, Sabrina collected admiration like it was her birthright, yet Elena never envied her sister. She loved her. Or at least she loved the version of Sabrina she hoped was real, the one who hugged her after breakups, who cheered when Elena got her first job at a local boutique, who called her Lena Bean. In that playful tone that disarmed suspicion, Elena clung to that illusion even when cracks began to show. On the evening of her promotion celebration, Elena stood in the heart of Manhattan's fashion district, her fingers wrapped around a glass of champagne she hadn't yet tasted. The private lounge buzzed with muted conversations and clinking glasses. This was supposed to be her night, a recognition of years spent working under Victoria Hale, one of the industry's sharpest icons. Now at 29, Elena was no longer just an assistant. She was Victoria's right hand, poised to design her own capsule collection. You did it, Lena. Sabrina's voice purred into her ear, saccharine sweet. She appeared beside her in a crimson dress that hugged her figure like it had been custom-made, which, knowing Sabrina, it probably was charged to someone else's credit card. Elena smiled, though something about the way Sabrina's hand lingered on her arm made her skin prickle. We did, Elena replied, because that's what Sister said. You've always believed in me. Sabrina's lips curled into something between a smirk and a secret. Of course, after all, some of us have to live vicariously. It was a strange comment, but before Elena could respond, Daniel appeared tall, confident, and handsome in a tailored suit. He slid his arm around Elena's waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. There's the woman of the hour, he said, his voice warm but edged with something possessive. Sabrina's eyes flicked between them, and for a moment too long they lingered on. Daniel, Elena noticed. She always noticed, but she pushed the thought aside like she always did. Daniel, don't let her get too comfortable, Sabrina teased, swirling her drink. You know, Elena, give her a little success and she'll forget all about us, mortals. They laughed, the kind of polite laughter that filled rooms but emptied hearts. Elena excused herself to greet Victoria across the room, feeling Sabrina's gaze follow her like a shadow. Later that night, as the party wound down and congratulations faded into the clatter of cleaned glasses, Sabrina offered to help Elena pack up her gifts and flowers. They stood alone in the dim light of the lounge, the air thick with unspoken words. You're really lucky, you know, Sabrina said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. A dream job, a perfect boyfriend. Everything just falls into place for you. Elena paused, her hands resting on a bouquet of white roses. It didn't just fall. Sabrina, I worked for this. Sabrina's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course you did. There it was, that flicker of something Elena had tried for years to ignore. Resentment dressed as admiration. A compliment dipped in poison. As they walked out into the cool night air, Sabrina linked arms with her like they were kids again, whispering, some people just don't know how to use the life they've been given. Elena laughed it off, pretending not to hear the weight behind the words. But as she watched her sister disappear into a waiting cab, waving with that signature smile, a chill settled in her chest. Days turned into weeks, and Elena immersed herself in work, sketching designs late into the night, while Daniel's business trips grew longer and Sabrina's visits became more frequent, always under the guise of checking in or girl time. One afternoon, Elena came home early to find Sabrina lounging on her couch sipping wine like she owned the place. Daniel gave me the spare key, Sabrina explained with a wink. Hope you don't mind. Elena forced a smile, telling herself it was harmless. After all, Sabrina was family. She'd been through a rough breakup recently. Maybe she just needed company. But when Elena noticed her favorite silk scarf missing, or the way Daniel grew strangely defensive whenever Sabrina's name came up, the knot in her stomach tightened. Still, she said nothing, because sisters didn't accuse each other of things they couldn't prove. Sisters trusted, didn't they? It wasn't until Elena overheard a conversation, a whispered phone call behind a closed door, that the truth began to unravel. Standing in the hallway, heart pounding, she caught fragments of Sabrina's voice. She doesn't suspect a thing, just a little longer. Once it's done, I'll have everything she never appreciated. Elena backed away, her breath shallow. Her mind raced with denial. No, not Sabrina. She wouldn't. But deep down, a voice she'd silenced for years whispered back, she already has. As the days ahead would reveal, Elena wasn't just imagining shadows. She was standing in the center of a storm she never saw coming. And her sister, her best friend, was the one holding the lightning. The rain tapped relentlessly against the apartment windows, a steady rhythm that matched the growing unease in Elena's chest. She sat at her dining table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee, its surface long since cooled. The words she'd overheard days ago echoed in her mind like a broken record. Sabrina's voice dripping with calculation. She doesn't suspect a thing. Elena wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that her sister, her own flesh and blood, wasn't capable of orchestrating something sinister behind her back, but the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Daniel had been distant. Excuses piled up like unopened mail, late meetings, unexpected trips, vague explanations that dissolved when pressed. And Sabrina, she was everywhere, too comfortable in Elena's home, too familiar with Daniel, too eager to insert herself into every corner of Elena's life. It all came crashing down on a Thursday morning. Elena arrived at Victoria Hale's studio as usual, portfolio in hand and heart steadying itself for a day of creativity. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it, the shift in atmosphere. Conversations halted, eyes darted away, whispers followed her like a trail of smoke. Victoria stood at the end of the hall, her sharp gaze colder than Elena had ever seen. In her hand was a printed email, bold, damning, undeniable. Elena Victoria's voice was clipped professional, but laced with disappointment. My office. Now confused and already dreading what was to come, Elena followed. The door shut behind them with a finality that made her stomach drop. Victoria tossed the email onto the desk. Care to explain this? Elena's eyes scanned the document, her pulse quickening with every word. It was an email sent from her account to Victoria's biggest competitor. Attached were confidential sketches, plans for the upcoming collection, and insider details that only someone in Elena's position could access. I didn't send this, Elena stammered, her throat tightening. Victoria, I swear I would never. The IP address matches your home network. Victoria cut in her tone like ice slicing through flesh. The timestamp was 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, when Sabrina had been alone in her apartment. Realization hit Elena like a freight train. Her mind raced through every moment she'd dismissed, every time she'd brushed off that nagging feeling. The spare key, the late-night visits, the whispered phone call. It was Sabrina. But how could she prove it? I've known you for years. Elena, Victoria continued, her expression softening just enough to reveal a hint of regret. But business is business. I can't afford a scandal. Elena's world shattered with those words. Within minutes, she was escorted out of the building. Her access revoked her reputation in tatters before she even had a chance to defend herself. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone was already buzzing with messages, rumors spreading like wildfire through the industry. Words like betrayal, untrustworthy, and blacklisted flashed across her screen. And sitting on her couch, legs crossed and sipping a latte, like nothing had happened, was Sabrina. Oh, hey, you're home early, Sabrina said, glancing up from her phone with a smile that made Elena's blood run cold. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, her voice barely a whisper. What did you do? Sabrina feigned innocence, tilting her head. What are you talking about? The email, Victoria. You ruined me. Elena's hands trembled, fury and heartbreak warring inside her. Sabrina let out a light laugh as if Elena had just told a silly joke. Come on, Lena. If your precious boss fired you over something like that, maybe you weren't as valuable as you thought. Tears stung Elena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why, Sabrina? I've done nothing but help you. I've always helped me. Sabrina's voice sharpened, her mask slipping for the first time. She stood, closing the distance between them, her eyes gleaming with venom. You think handing me your leftovers and patting me on the head makes you a saint? You had everything, Elena. The career, the man, the life I deserved. Elena's breath caught Daniel. Sabrina's lips curled into a victorious smile. Oh, you didn't know. He's been staying at my place for the past week. I guess he finally realized which sister knows how to keep him entertained. It was a dagger straight to the heart. Elena staggered back, her world tilting off its axis. She wanted to scream, to throw something to make Sabrina hurt the way she was hurting. but Sabrina stood there, calm, collected, feeding off Elena's devastation. "You won't get away with this," Elena whispered, her voice shaking but laced with a spark of defiance. Sabrina leaned in, her words a cruel whisper. "Face it, Elena. I'm better at being you than you ever were." With that, Sabrina grabbed her coat and sauntered out of the apartment, leaving Elena surrounded by the remnants of a life that wasn't hers anymore. By nightfall, Daniel's official relationship status had changed publicly, flaunting his new romance with Sabrina. Photos surfaced of them at exclusive events smiling for cameras, while Elena's name was dragged through gossip columns as the disgraced designer. Her phone rang, her mother's number flashing on the screen. For a moment, Elena thought maybe, just maybe, someone in her family would take her side, but when she answered, all she heard was her mother's weary sigh. "Elena, why can't you just be happy for your sister? Sabrina told us everything. Maybe this is a sign you need to humble yourself." Click. The call ended before Elena could respond. Alone in the dark, Elena sat amidst the ruins of her career, her relationship, and the family she thought she could rely on. But as the tears finally fell, something inside her hardened. Sabrina hadn't just stolen her life. She had given Elena a reason to build a new one that no one could ever take away again. And this time, Elena wasn't going to play nice. The headlines faded faster than the pain. Within weeks, Elena Carter's name was no longer trending, not as the traitorous assistant, not as the woman scorned. The world moved on as it always did, leaving Elena behind in the wreckage of a life that wasn't hers anymore. But what no one realized was that Elena didn't disappear out of shame. She disappeared to rebuild. The day after Sabrina paraded her stolen life across social media, Elena packed a single suitcase, left her apartment keys on the counter, and walked away without telling anyone where she was going. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic posts, just silence, a weapon far sharper than words. Her destination wasn't random. Victoria Hale had been many things: a ruthless businesswoman, a perfectionist, but above all, she was a strategist. When Elena's world collapsed, Victoria didn't just watch from the sidelines. She reached out, offering something no one else did: belief. In a quiet villa tucked away in the south of France, far from Manhattan's flashing cameras and venomous whispers, Elena found herself standing before Victoria once more. "I knew it wasn't you," Victoria said simply, pouring 2 glasses of wine as if they were old friends rather than mentor and disgraced protege. "But business demanded a show. Now that the curtain's down, it's time you learn how to play the game properly." Elena's hands were still trembling when she accepted the glass, but her eyes burned with a new fire. "I don't want pity, Victoria. I want power." A slow smile spread across Victoria's face. "Good. Because pity never built empires." What followed were the hardest 18 months of Elena's life, not of survival, but of transformation. Under Victoria's brutal yet brilliant guidance, Elena shed the skin of the obedient assistant, the dutiful sister, the woman who once believed hard work alone would shield her from betrayal. She studied not just fashion design, but the art of influence, branding, negotiation. The unspoken language of power reserved for those ruthless enough to claim it. Victoria introduced her to circles Elena never knew existed. Investors who didn't care about scandal. If you could deliver results, designers who thrived in anonymity while controlling the faces of global brands. Elena wasn't rebuilding her old life. She was creating something entirely new, and she did it under a name no one would recognize. Yves Saint Laurent. Back in New York, Sabrina flourished in the spotlight she'd stolen. With Daniel on her arm and Elena out of the picture, she began marketing herself as a rising fashion influencer. She hosted parties, attended galas, and posted daily pictures draped in luxury she hadn't earned. But for all her charm, Sabrina lacked one crucial thing: talent. Her attempts to launch a fashion line fell flat. Designs were mocked, collaborations fell through, and behind closed doors, Daniel's patience thinned as the bills piled up and the investors vanished. What Sabrina didn't know was that every opportunity she chased was being quietly intercepted. Because Yves Saint Laurent, the mysterious designer taking Europe by storm, had begun expanding into the US, and no serious brand would dare affiliate with Sabrina once they realized who controlled the market. Elena watched from across the ocean, her heart no longer aching but calculating. Every failed deal, every rejection, Sabrina faced was a silent note in the symphony of revenge Elena was composing. By the end of the second year, Elena stood in front of a mirror in her Paris apartment. A far cry from the modest flat she'd abandoned, gone were the soft features of the woman who once begged for her sister's loyalty. In her place stood a force wrapped in elegance and steel. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. It's time, the New York showcase is yours. Elena's lips curved into a smile, not of joy, but of precision. The showcase was the pinnacle event of the year, where elite designers unveiled their collections to the world's most powerful buyers, critics and celebrities. Invitations were impossible to secure unless you were royalty in the industry. And Sabrina had been bragging for weeks about attending, believing Daniel's dwindling connections had earned them a front row seat. What she didn't know was that E.C. Laurent wasn't just attending, she was headlining. When Elena's private jet touched down in New York, no one recognized the woman who stepped onto the tarmac. The media was too busy chasing stories about Sabrina's latest desperate attempt to stay relevant, whispers of unpaid debts and a canceled engagement looming over her curated Instagram life. Elena checked into a penthouse suite overlooking the city that once chewed her up and spat her out. As she sipped champagne by the window, she glanced at the folder Victoria's team had prepared full of details about Sabrina and Daniel's downfall. It wasn't enough to watch them struggle. They needed to see exactly who was pulling the strings when everything they ever wanted slipped through their fingers. The night before the showcase, Elena sent a single unsigned invitation to Sabrina, an exclusive pass to the designer's private after-party. The name printed in bold gold letters read E.C. Laurent. Sabrina's predictable reaction came hours later, splashed across social media, gushing posts about how she'd secured a personal invite from the hottest name in fashion. Elena chuckled, closing the app. Let her brag, she thought. It'll make the reveal that much sweeter. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Elena stood poised at the edge of her vengeance. Not with rage, but with the calm of someone who had already won. She had taken her sister's ambition, her connections, her future, and molded them into an empire Sabrina could never touch. And tomorrow night, under the brightest lights and the eyes of the world, Sabrina would finally realize. Elena didn't just survive, she conquered. The venue pulsed with anticipation, the kind of electric tension that only came before a legendary reveal. Manhattan's most prestigious fashion hall had never gleamed brighter, its chandeliers casting golden light over a sea of elites dressed to impress. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and at the center of it all was a name whispered with equal parts curiosity and awe. E.C. Laurent backstage. Elena stood calm amidst the flurry of assistants and models making last-minute adjustments. She wore a sleek black gown, minimalist, yet commanding, her hair pinned in a style that framed the sharp confidence now etched into her features. Tonight wasn't about revenge fueled by anger. It was about closure delivered with precision. As the clock struck 8, the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. Elena watched from behind the curtain as the first model stepped onto the runway, draped in a design that blended elegance with quiet defiance, her signature. Meanwhile, in the front row, Sabrina adjusted her designer knockoff dress the best she could afford, now that Daniel's business was crumbling and creditors were circling like vultures. But tonight, none of that mattered to her, because tonight, she was someone again. Leaning over to the influencer seated beside her, Sabrina whispered, I've got a private invite to Laurent's after-party. We might even talk collaboration. The influencer's eyes widened with envy, exactly the reaction Sabrina craved. As the show progressed, Sabrina clapped politely, though she barely paid attention to the artistry before her. She was too busy rehearsing the story she'd spin tomorrow, how she'd charmed yet another powerful name in fashion. But then the final model walked out. The gown was breathtaking, an intricate design of black silk and shimmering silver threads that caught every flicker of light. The audience gasped in unison, recognizing instantly that this was the showstopper piece, and following behind the model, stepping onto the runway herself, was E.C. Laurent. Sabrina straightened in her seat, craning her neck for a better look at the elusive designer. The woman's posture radiated authority, her presence effortlessly commanding the room. But as Laurent reached the end of the runway and turned to face the crowd, Sabrina's smug expression faltered. Because staring back at her beneath the elegant facade and the unfamiliar name was a face she knew all too well, Elena. Sabrina's voice came out as a whisper drowned by the thunderous applause erupting around her. Elena's gaze locked onto her sister's unwavering and cold. There was no trace of the woman Sabrina once belittled, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated every moment leading to this. Before Sabrina could process the shock, the announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind tonight's collection, Miss Elena Carter. Known to the world as E.C., Laurent gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of murmurs. Reporters scrambled to adjust their headlines. Cameras zoomed in, capturing Sabrina's pale face as realization set in. Elena raised a microphone, her voice smooth and composed. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her eyes never leaving Sabrina. "This collection isn't just about fashion. It's about resilience, about reclaiming what was stolen, not just fabric or designs, but identity." The room grew still, sensing something monumental unfolding. "There was a time," Elena continued, her voice steady but sharp as glass, "when betrayal cost me everything I thought mattered. My career, my reputation, even the people I trusted most." Whispers swirled like a storm as guests began connecting dots, their gazes shifting towards Sabrina. "But I learned that when someone tries to take your life," Elena said, her lips curving into a faint smile, "you don't just survive, you build a new one. Better, untouchable." Victoria Hale emerged from the wings holding a sleek folder. She handed it to a nearby reporter with a knowing nod. Within seconds, media outlets began receiving the same file containing irrefutable evidence of Sabrina's forged emails. Daniel's complicity and the entire scheme that had framed Elena 2 years prior. Sabrina's phone buzzed uncontrollably in her clutch as notifications flooded in, articles exposing her treachery, headlines labeling her a fraud, a liar, a cautionary tale. Panic clotted her throat as she stumbled to her feet, but before she could flee, security approached politely but firmly. "Miss Carter," one guard said, "you're requested to leave the premises. The designer doesn't tolerate imposters or thieves at her events." The humiliation was suffocating. "I'm her sister, Sabrina," hissed desperation creeping into her voice. "You can't do this." From the stage, Elena spoke once more, her tone slicing through the chaos. "Family isn't defined by blood," she declared, her gaze like a blade. "It's defined by loyalty. And you lost that the moment you smiled at me with a knife behind your back." The audience erupted, some in applause, others in stunned silence. Phones captured every second as Sabrina was escorted out, her carefully curated world collapsing in real time. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, rumors already circulating that he had fled the city amidst financial ruin and impending lawsuits. As the doors closed behind Sabrina, Elena turned back to the crowd, her composure flawless. "This is more than a comeback," she said softly, but the microphone carried her words like a final verdict. "It's a reminder you can steal someone's moment, but you'll never own their future." With that, the lights dimmed, signaling the end of the show, but the beginning of Elena's reign. Backstage, Victoria raised her glass in a silent toast. Elena nodded in return, feeling not triumph but peace. She hadn't just taken back what was hers. She'd taken everything Sabrina ever wanted, and she'd done it without raising her voice. Because true power didn't scream, it simply stood tall while others crumbled. The morning after the showcase, Manhattan awoke to headlines that painted Elena Carter as more than just a survivor. She was now a symbol of silent power and poetic justice. From betrayal to empire, how Yves Laurent unmasked her past and conquered fashion's elite sister exposed Sabrina Carter's fall from grace. Elena stood on the balcony of her penthouse suite overlooking the city that once tried to erase her. The crisp breeze carried with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint echoes of a world now speaking her name with reverence, not ridicule. Her phone buzzed endlessly, offers from top brands, interview requests, collaborations, and even invitations to speak at empowerment conferences. She let them pile up. For once, Elena wasn't in a rush to answer anyone. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Victoria Hale entered, her signature sharp elegance softened by a rare, genuine smile. "You did well," Victoria said, handing Elena a newspaper folded to the feature article about her. Elena glanced at it, then set it aside. "It's done." Victoria studied her for a moment before nodding. "What will you do now?" It was a question Elena had asked herself all night. She had spent years focused on this moment, reclaiming her dignity, exposing Sabrina, and proving to the world that she was more than a victim of betrayal. Now that the dust had settled, she realized something profound. Revenge wasn't the end. It was just a door she needed to close. Later that afternoon, curiosity led her to open one of the many emails flooding her inbox. It was from a law firm confirming that Sabrina had officially filed for bankruptcy. Daniel had vanished, likely hiding from his creditors overseas. Their shared apartment was being repossessed, and every so-called friend had abandoned them. The second the scandal broke, Elena felt no joy reading it, only clarity. She didn't need to watch them suffer. Their downfall was inevitable because it was built on lies. What mattered was that she had risen, not by becoming like them, but by outgrowing the need for their validation. That evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Elena made one final decision. She asked her driver to take her to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, far from the glitz of Fashion Week. When she arrived, she found Sabrina sitting alone on a park bench wrapped in a worn coat, staring blankly at the ground. No cameras, no admirers. Just a woman stripped of every illusion she once clung to. Sabrina looked up as Elena approached, disbelief flickering across her face. Here to gloat. Elena shook her head, her expression unreadable. No, I have nothing left to prove. For a long moment they sat in silence, two sisters who had once shared childhood secrets now separated by choices that couldn't be undone. You ruined me, Sabrina whispered, bitterness lacing every word. No, Elena replied calmly. You ruined yourself, I just stopped saving you. Sabrina's eyes filled with tears, but whether they were from regret or resentment, Elena couldn't tell and didn't care to. I came here for one reason. Elena continued, standing up. To tell you that this is the last time we'll ever cross paths. Sabrina scoffed, wiping her face. So that's it. You get to walk away as the queen and I'm left with nothing. Elena paused, then leaned in slightly, her voice soft but firm. You were never fighting to build something of your own, Sabrina. You were too busy chasing what I had, and that's why you lost. She straightened, her gaze steady. I don't hate you, I just finally see you for who you are and who I refuse to be. With that, Elena turned and walked away, leaving Sabrina in the dim glow of a street lamp alone with the weight of her own choices. Days turned into weeks, and Elena officially launched her brand under her true name, merging the prestige of E.C. Laurent with the authenticity of Elena Carter. The world embraced her story not just of revenge, but of resilience, reinvention, and grace under fire. One crisp autumn morning, as Elena prepared for a meeting with global investors, her assistant entered with a package, a beautifully bound notebook. There's no sender listed, the assistant noted. Elena opened it to find the first page blank except for a single sentence written in familiar handwriting, her own. She didn't stab me with a knife, she used a smile. It was the journal she had once hidden beneath the floorboards of her old apartment, the one where she documented every bruise that didn't show, every betrayal. Masked in politeness. Elena smiled softly, running her fingers over the words, but instead of closing it, she turned to a fresh page and picked up a pen. This time she wrote, She took my life, but I built a kingdom from the ashes. As she set the notebook aside, Elena walked toward the window, the city sprawling before her like a canvas. Her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about becoming untouchable, not by destroying others, but by mastering herself. And as for Sabrina, she would remain exactly where she belonged in Elena's past, a forgotten footnote in a legacy too grand for envy to ever touch again. Because true victory wasn't in taking everything from your enemy. It was in having everything they could never steal.